Hurtling blindly through the brilliant, swirling corridor of the cosmic wormhole, the Saturn V-REX races toward the absolute unknown. But without warning, the vibrant tunnel of light violently shatters, spitting the ship out into a bleak, oppressive sky filled with ominous crimson clouds. The mighty thrusters instantly choke and die, entirely drained of their power as they enter this strange new atmosphere. The nose of the spacecraft dips sharply downward, caught instantly in the terrifying, crushing grip of a gravitational pull 3 times stronger than Earth's. Falling at a horrifying, breakneck speed, the black and white ship blurs into a helpless meteor, plummeting straight toward the surface. Inside the plunging cockpit, the extreme G-force pins Grog violently against the back of his captain's chair, completely paralyzing him. The immense pressure flattens the brave little engineer's plastic face backward, distorting his usually cheerful expression.
Right behind him, poor Rexy is being squeezed so hard his heavy tan cheeks are mashed completely flat against the inside of his glass dome. Through the reinforced windshield, a hostile, dark red landscape races up to meet them with terrifying speed. But instead of smashing into solid, jagged rock, the nose of the ship aims directly for a massive, glistening basin of dark brown sludge. The Saturn V-REX impacts the surface with a colossal, earth-shattering plunge that shakes the very core of the planet. The mighty spacecraft buries its nose deep into the thick, unrelenting mud, grinding to a violent, absolute halt. A magnificent explosion of heavy, dark brown plastic sludge blasts high into the red sky, raining back down to completely bury the lower half of the ship. Thick black smoke and hissing steam aggressively vent from the battered hull, signaling the end of their beloved vessel's journey.
And then, a heavy, suffocating silence falls over the crash site, welcoming our heroes to a cold and unforgiving new world. After what feels like an eternity, the heavy metal hinges of the ship's airlock slowly and painfully begin to creak open. A trembling yellow hand reaches out, gripping the edge of the door frame as Grog desperately tries to pull his own weight upward. The brutal, unforgiving gravity of the dark red planet turns this simple movement into a monumental feat of strength, his plastic joints shaking under the strain. Exhausted before he even begins, Grog barely manages to drag himself out, standing unsteadily upon the tilted hull of his ruined ship. The instant he tries to stand tall, the crushing weight forces him right back down, buckling his knees with a painful, audible snap. Even the resilient little white daisy on top of his bronze helmet surrenders to the gravity, drooping flat against the metal. Grog's chest heaves as he tries to take his first step, his left foot feeling like it has been encased in solid lead. Moving in agonizing slow motion, every single inch of progress requires absolute maximum effort, with imaginary beads of sweat rolling down his visor. He carefully slides down the slick, angled side of the spacecraft, dropping heavily into the dark brown muck below. Thanks to his tiny, lightweight minifigure body, Grog only sinks down to his ankles, finding the thick mud difficult but manageable to walk through. He slowly pivots his heavy body around and raises an exhausted arm, weakly waving for his giant partner to follow him out. Rexy appears in the doorway, giving his massive body a dramatic shake to throw off the dark mud clinging to the metal frame. The giant T-Rex puffs out his red chest and gives a firm, incredibly confident nod, entirely convinced that gravity is no match for an apex predator. Winding up his powerful hind legs, Rexy executes a massive, prideful leap right out of the airlock, aiming for the solid ground. But physics has a cruel sense of humor,
and the instant his heavy, brick-built body leaves the ship, the triple gravity grabs him and yanks him straight down like a colossal iron anvil. Rexy hits the sludge with a catastrophic, deafening plunge that violently displaces the surrounding earth. The sheer, concentrated impact of his massive weight shatters the dense surface tension of the muddy basin. Instantly, the giant dinosaur begins to sink straight down into the dark brown abyss at a truly alarming rate. The thick sludge rapidly swallows his powerful legs, rising quickly over his heavy tan belly and climbing relentlessly past his broad red shoulders. With a final, sickening squelch, Rexy's rapid descent comes to a sudden and absolute stop.
The sight is simultaneously terrifying and utterly hilarious, as the mighty king of the dinosaurs has been completely buried alive by the mud. Above the surface, nothing remains but his giant glass dome, two uselessly tiny, flailing arms, and the very silver tip of his armored tail wiggling frantically in the back. Rexy blinks his dotted eyes in sheer disbelief, straining every muscle in his powerful legs to step upward, but he is completely entombed. Total panic sets in as Rexy begins thrashing his tiny arms wildly, paddling at the thick mud like a drowning puppy while throwing his giant head from side to side. Horrified by his friend's predicament, Grog forces his heavy, aching legs to drag him through the muck toward the trapped dinosaur. The brave little engineer wraps his yellow arms securely around the base of Rexy's glass dome, bends his knees, and pulls upward with every ounce of strength he possesses.
The mud makes a disgusting, sucking sound, but against the brutal combination of the planet's gravity and Rexy's massive weight, the dinosaur doesn't budge a single millimeter. Grog's muddy boots completely lose their traction, and he slips backward, landing flat on his back with his face covered in dark brown grime. Rexy looks down at his fallen friend with a pathetic, trembling lip, pressing his two tiny fingers together in a desperate, silent plea for salvation. Covered in sludge, Grog slowly pushes himself up from the ground, looking from the trapped dinosaur to the ruined ship, his eyes narrowing with a sudden spark of mechanical genius. The indomitable spirit of a master builder ignites within him, proving that while gravity might crush their bodies, it can never crush their brilliant minds. Dragging his feet back to the wreckage, Grog begins frantically ripping long, light gray Technic lift arms straight out of the ship's cargo bay. A triumphant, driving musical rhythm seems to pulse through his veins as he transforms into a one-man construction crew. Fighting through the oppressive weight of the atmosphere, he expertly pins the beams together, erecting a colossal A-frame crane directly over the mud pit. Deep in the sludge, Rexy watches the construction with wide, hopeful eyes, occasionally spitting out a glob of dark mud that splashes against his visor. Grog muscles the towering structure upright, positioning the apex of the crane perfectly above Rexy's trapped head. He rapidly installs a complex multi-tiered gearbox, using perfect mechanical gear ratios to multiply his pulling power against the planetary gravity. With the mechanics in place, he lowers a thick, heavy-duty winch cable equipped with a massive grappling hook straight down to his friend. The heavy metal hook securely latches onto the reinforced silver ring at the base of Rexy's armored neck with a reassuring, solid click. Grog marches over to the primary crank, wiping his muddy hands together and taking a deep, steadying breath to prepare for the ultimate test of strength. He grabs the handle and begins to push. The resistance is absolutely monstrous, causing the giant Technic gears to grind and shriek under the intense pressure. The thick cable snaps completely taut, vibrating like a guitar string under the monumental load. Around Rexy's neck, the thick, dark mud begins to stretch and warp upward, clinging desperately to the dinosaur's red scales.
Grog grits his teeth, leaning his entire body weight backward until his plastic torso bends like a drawn bowstring, forcing the crank to turn. Slowly, agonizingly, Rexy's heavy neck is stretched upward, pulling his glass chin right through the thick, rubbery sludge. The mechanical winch reaches its absolute maximum load capacity, the gray Technic beams visibly bowing and warping under the terrifying tension.
Rexy squeezes his eyes tightly shut, bracing himself as the stubborn mud stretches out like incredibly thick, dark strings of melted cheese. Summoning the very last drop of his strength, Grog lets out a silent, roaring battle cry and forces the gear to click into the final notch. The suction of the mud violently breaks with an incredibly loud, echoing pop, exactly like pulling a giant, stubborn root straight out of the earth. The immense holding friction of the swamp completely and instantly vanishes. Physics immediately violently overcorrects, and the sudden release of all that stored mechanical tension turns the heavy crane into an overpowered slingshot. Rexy is instantly catapulted straight up into the crimson sky, rocketing upward like a massive red ballistic missile. He clears the towering Technic crane entirely, launching high into the eerie, dark red clouds above the crash site. For one glorious, ultra-slow motion second at the very peak of his flight, Rexy experiences total weightlessness, waving his tiny arms like a majestic bird as chunks of brown mud orbit his body like a miniature galaxy. But the brief moment of freedom ends as the planet's relentless 3G gravity grabs him by the tail, ripping him back down. Rexy plummets back toward the surface in a steep, terrifying arc, entirely clearing the safety of the soft mud pit. He hits the ground with an absolutely devastating, bone-rattling smash. The giant dinosaur lands face first, flattening his massive tan belly completely against a jagged, dark red stone outcropping. He lies there completely motionless, squished flat against the rock like a discarded bearskin rug, the only sign of life being the pathetic, vibrating tip of his silver tail. Back at the pit, the violently overloaded Technic crane finally snaps, the cable snapping back as gears rain down into the mud.
Grog rests his hands heavily on his knees, gasping for air and wiping a thick smear of brown mud across his forehead. Exhausted but relieved, he slowly drags his heavy boots out of the pit, trudging over to the rocky outcropping. Grog reaches out and gently pokes his tiny yellow finger directly into Rexy's flattened red ribs. With a pathetic, groaning squeak, Rexy slowly pushes his tiny arms against the rock, peeling his flattened body off the stone like a piece of tape. His prehistoric brain is completely scrambled, and a halo of imaginary blinking yellow stars circles playfully around his glass dome. He shakes his massive head vigorously to clear the dizziness, realizing that despite being bruised and coated in thick sludge, he has survived his first deadly encounter. Overwhelmed with gratitude, Rexy throws his arms around Grog, aggressively nuzzling his filthy, mud-caked visor right into Grog's face, instantly covering the little engineer in muck.
Grog simply laughs, patting the giant, muddy back of his best friend before turning and pointing bravely out into the distance. Standing together on the elevated rock, the camera sweeps wide to reveal the true, imposing scale of their new home. Before them stretches a brutal, untamed alien wasteland where jagged, dark red spires of rock pierce a swirling, suffocating crimson sky. Gone is the warm, inviting yellow glow of the cheese moon. This world promises nothing but cold, unrelenting hostility. But Grog simply crosses his arms tightly over his chest, while Rexy fights the crushing gravity to stand tall, puffing out his chest with absolute defiant pride. The gravity may be heavy, and the world may be vicious, but they have survived the landing, and they are ready to conquer this planet together. The camera slowly tracks backward, leaving the two muddy, heroic silhouettes standing fearlessly against the howling red wind. Down in the thick sludge of the crash site, dark brown bricks begin to bubble to the surface, shifting and snapping together to form deep, glowing red letters. The words, "End of Episode 71," stand boldly against the muck. As the harsh alien wind blows, the letters slowly begin to erode, fading away into the dust. The scene, beautifully, solemnly, fades into complete darkness, honoring the heavy, majestic silence of the Crimson World. The screen remains completely black. Total, uninterrupted silence fills the void. The suspense builds in the absolute quiet. Still waiting. Nothing but empty darkness. A fraction of a second passes. Suddenly, bursting straight up through the center of the pitch-black screen, a tiny mound of dark brown mud explodes upward for exactly 1 frame as a filthy, mud-covered Zippy the Ant thrusts his glowing red like and subscribe sign into the camera with a lightning-fast squeak before plunging instantly back into the dark.